Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office podcast, where I look to distill the best practices and best ideas of the world's most successful families and their family offices. I hope to provide thought-provoking opinions and feature amazing thought leaders to our listeners of the podcast with an eye towards the future of the family office. Today's title, and we decided to change it. So today's title is All Corporate Trustees Suck. Use them prudently. Now, ironic, you wouldn't expect that title coming from a corporate trustee himself. Oh, but there's a reason why he feels that way. So our special guest today is Christopher N. Holtby. He's a co-founder and chief marketing officer for Wealth Advisors Trust Company. Chris was born in Canada with global experiences growing up and moving to America for education and work. He's a member of the G3 Club and has many a formal corporate successes, but his passion rests on disrupting staid and stodgy industries. I wonder what that could be. Wealth Advisors Trust Company doesn't invest trust assets and knows corporate trustees have over centuries of misaligned family goals. In 2009, an ex-Ernst & Young frustrated employee looking at the industry with over 700 years of trustee industry experiences as a whole, as an industry, decided to disrupt this clubby industry with innovative, collaborative, and easy-to-use trustee services. What are some of the things you're going to get out of the online meeting, the podcast, the video today? You're going to understand why all corporate trustees suck. Understanding the 3 trust company models, tricks to negotiate lower trustee fees, knowing how to pick any type of trustee, and a simple idea to save state and income taxes. We're also going to talk about the opportunity during COVID-19 relative to estate planning issues that many of you are now familiar with, but we're going to do a deeper dive looking at it from the perspective of your decision and your choices of a trustee. Well, Christopher, that was quite the buildup. We'll start with how are you?
I'm feeling much better. Last week I was not feeling so well. I don't know what it was, but I'm good.
Yeah, so Chris was really, really sick last week. We would have liked to have done kind of a preamble, but that wasn't in the cards. But I'm glad he's safe now. A little bit of a reminder, Chris, I would speak up just a little bit.
Got it.
Why don't we begin? How, when, and why did these different type of trust companies come to exist in the first place?
So the trust world is 2,000 years old. The Roman Empire gave us trusts that were created in wills, testamentary trusts. The British Empire, after the Crusades, gave us lifetime or revocable trusts. Our founding fathers inherited what the British were doing, and part of what the founding fathers did is gave each state the control of their own trust law. So that's why you have 50 states with 50 different trust laws. So the reason why we have different models is because for the last 700 years, the only model that really anyone cared about was the traditional trust company model. We call this the red model. The trustee controlled everything: distributions, accounting, administration, investments, custody, the whole kit and caboodle. About 20 years ago, states like Delaware, South Dakota, and Nevada said, you know what? There's actually a better way to offer trustee services. And we call those the green model, which are known as directed trusts, and the blue model, which are delegated trusts. At the end of the day, the blue and the green model are all about control and choice. And the red model is not a bad model in the right situation. I would also say even the blue and green models still might not be the right answer, because sometimes an individual trustee is the best answer, or not even needing a trust at all. So that's how they came to exist. America loves choice.
Yes, we do. Why do corporate trustees give away their services when investing trust assets?
Because the greatest ability to make money is managing investment assets. It takes the least amount of time. It is the greatest ROI that they can have against the risk and the normal expenditures of running any company. Trust administration outside of investing trust assets, think of it as supply chain management. Think of it as a Amazon warehouse. A book comes in, a book comes out. There's the interaction with the person buying the book online, the employees doing the work. So trust administration is very, very heavy on supply chain management concept, and it takes a lot of work and effort. And corporate trustees are really bad about efficiency. They just keep adding more people. So the way they make all the money is on the investment assets, and that's why they technically give away the trustee business, and why they have so many trust officers, why they have so many trust accounts for each trust officer to balance out the P&L.
You know, Christopher, we just kind of jumped right into it, and I have plenty of questions that are going to be on the deeper side of things. But I suppose I should, for the audience, take a little bit of a step back relative to, okay, there is a entity, a trust, a dynasty trust, a irrevocable trust, whatever that might be given the circumstance. So I'm going to the basics here. Every trust needs a trustee. Why would I want to pick a corporate trustee over someone individual in the family that I feel may be more aligned with my principles and my beliefs and my desires?
So, Angelo, can I take one step back? The first decision is, do you even want a trust? If you just want to give the money directly to people with all the pros and cons, you don't even need a trust. To your question, the reason why you would use an individual trustee first is twofold. One, the trust is not going to last more than about 100 years. Two, the individuals who are the beneficiaries can actually handle the money themselves. You're not worried about divorce or creditor protection. So if those are all the situations, then you can have a friend or family as the individual trustee. You could have one of the children as their own trustee and beneficiary, knowing that they won't have any creditor or spousal protection in a divorce. But if those are all fine, then there's no reason ever to use a corporate trustee.
Well, you queued that up pretty well, because obviously, of course, I would think with families of wealth and success that started from nothing, that built companies and enterprises and take pride in their legacy and what they built, want to provide to their causes and their loved ones. So henceforth, things like divorce, which happens in 50% of marriages, to creditor protection are going to be very, very important issues. So then you're potentially looking at the benefit of having a corporate trustee. What's kind of been the traditional model, not necessarily to name names of classic old American or European, whatever, trust companies, and maybe they're negatives. We'll get to that soon enough. But so this is a model where the corporation, the corporate entity becomes the trustee. So it's not really reliant on one individual who eventually will come and go, meaning they'll pass away. Is there a certain set of standards that the trustee is given by the creator of the trust to follow certain benchmarks or certain parameters on investing, on distribution? How does that work?
So there's two parts to that. The trustee is given guidance in the trust document about distributions. That's the intent. And sometimes attorneys are not very good about making the intent clear. And so the trustee then has to look at trust law in their state and say, what is the intent? What is my fiduciary legal liability in making distribution decisions if I get it wrong? And so what you see is traditional trust companies are very worried about getting it wrong. They're never they never are willing to say, I'll resign because I'm not comfortable making this decision. They actually don't like doing that. We have no problem doing that. The other problem is on the investment side, their decisions are going to be no different than if you went to, or if a family office ran the money themselves. There is a fiduciary responsibility and liability. Again, the instructions are given in the trust document, what you can buy, what you can sell, how you have to think about the investments. That's actually the easiest part. The hardest part and the most contentious part is on the distributions. A sidebar, corporate trustees do not do trust tax planning. They just do trust tax return. That's sort of like saying, I'm going to give you an ice cream cone, but I'm not going to give you ice cream. And corporate trustees never tell you they don't do both, they just do one. So that's a quick answer to your question. Oh, the other thing to remember is the reason why big trust companies are so prevalent is because before stocks were held in electronic format through the Depository Trust Clearing Corporation, they were actually held in vaults in these trust companies. And so that's why you see such large cap and surplus requirements. Today, since all stocks are held electronically, that's really no longer an issue. Anyways, so there you go.
Well, that's actually a very important point. Going back at least to the history of trust companies and the value that they provided to families. Let's assume the beneficiaries or others are potentially dissatisfied with decisions and directions. How complex is it to change a corporate trustee? Do you need a trust protector to be able to make a decision to do that? So it's kind of two questions in one.
The answer is no, you don't need a trust protector. The problem is a lot of attorneys put language in trust documents where they can appoint a new trustee. They have language where the corporate trustee can resign, but you'd be amazed how many times attorneys do not put in how beneficiaries or a trust protector can remove a corporate trustee with or without cause just because. So there are two people that should be able to remove any trustee, individual or corporate. Is the trust protector. They have other roles, and typically you see them in either a committee or as an individual. And then the beneficiaries, should also have the power to remove a corporate trustee. Always make sure that it's a majority, not unanimous, because it's very hard as families get bigger to have a unanimous decision on anything. Also, if an individual trustee is used, make sure that, if a corporate trustee is used, make sure the document clearly states that if a new trustee is chosen, the family wants to make sure that another corporate trustee is chosen, not a friend or family. That's a decision. It makes no difference what the family wants, but be careful with that language because attorneys don't always catch that.
And things change in terms of state guidelines. You mentioned some states that generally are deemed to have favorable to the creator and the beneficiary: Delaware, South Dakota, Wyoming, Nevada. I believe others potentially could be Rhode Island, Oklahoma. Again, it varies, and it seems to be expanding. One could be a rule against perpetuity. So if you want the trust as a dynasty trust to last for generations and generations. So my question being, how difficult is it to change the situs or domicile from one state to another if simply that prior state is no longer as effective or efficient as other states could be?
As long as the trust document states that the governing law cannot be changed, it's that quick. It's literally that quick.
I didn't know it was quite that easy, but that's important. We did have a question come in from one of our live audience members. And again, sometimes without the full context, they could be a little tricky, but here we go. What about a silent trust where beneficiaries don't have roles yet?
So in states like Delaware, South Dakota, and Nevada, those beneficiaries that maybe could also be called remaindermen who aren't getting distributions today would actually have no knowledge that they are a future beneficiary. It's important to remember that South Dakota that's in there forever, whereas in Delaware and Nevada, you have to reapply every 2 years. So the question was, why, or what is my opinion on it? Sorry, I may have potentially misspoke.
Well, we'll potentially start with your opinion. A silent trust where beneficiaries don't have roles yet.
That is a philosophical issue between the family and their wealth and how they view what future generations are going to do, between trust distributions being part of being supportive or being enabling. You know, being supportive is allowing people to make mistakes, allowing people to succeed within confines. Enabling, meaning that it's the SNL joke, the trust fund baby. So it really comes down to the philosophy of a family, of their money and their wealth, of their family and their wealth. That would be the best way how I would answer that question.
As a bit of a follow-up to that from one of our live listeners, meaning how they can fire the corporate trustee. Who would do this instead? You mentioned believing that beneficiaries should have this power.
You could have a trust protector. You could have a committee group of members whose job it is to hire and fire CPA firms, law firms, valuation firms, investment advisors, corporate trustees. You could have that as well. So you can make it as simple or as complicated as you want. It can be a committee, it can be a trust protector, or it can be the beneficiaries themselves.
Would a trust protector, as that likely is an individual, again, they don't live forever, is there any such thing as succession trust protectors, and what's the process for doing that?
It's as simple as the successor process for a corporate trustee. You have maybe 1, 2, and 3. Again, if the grantor is 60, the trust protectors should be about 40 years old, give or take, not his peers who are 60. And then you allow the beneficiaries to have a mechanism of how to choose a trust protector. So it's a very simple 1, 2, 3 sort of step process.
More of a legal question, which we have covered with people like Tom Handler in the relatively recent past, but relative to setting up a trust, depending, I'm assuming, on the state, certain states are going to be better than others in terms of privacy. And for very, very wealthy families, keeping things very private from public prying eyes and others is very, very important. So some states, I'm assuming, are going to be better than others. Kind of a follow-up to that, and again, it's more of a legal question, is the person who's the beneficiary that may be married, that may potentially, again, get divorced, I'm assuming the family setting up the trust didn't want it to have happen where that spouse could then reach into the trust, which technically is not in the name of that beneficiary. But that does pose the question in marriage relative to prenup and postnup agreements, relative to certain things relative to trust assets and resources created before the marriage need to be noted. I'm assuming that's going to vary from state to state. California and New York are likely going to have very liberal laws relative to everything being inclusive, and maybe a Texas or South Dakota could be a little bit more protective. I don't know if that was a question or more of a rambling comment, but I'd love to hear your feedback on it.
So you are correct. States like Nevada, Delaware, Wyoming, Tennessee, New Hampshire are going to be more stringent in protecting the beneficiaries' future rights to trust assets. And there will also be a sense of privacy within the state of South Dakota that you wouldn't get in New Jersey or New York, but you would also get it in Delaware or Nevada. So I would agree with all the comments that you made.
And again, another somewhat more of a legal type question. Various states are going to have various levels of privacy and protection. Obviously, a family putting resources into a trust, you hope there's nothing like fraudulent conveyance or something like that that's negative. I'm assuming the US government probably has, a 10-year window in terms of going back and looking at the trust. One, I don't know if that was a random and wrong comment, and that may pose the question, for certain assets and resources, may it make sense to have the trust in offshore jurisdictions?
So in South Dakota, Delaware, and Nevada, there's a 2-year look-back rule, and any corporate trustee will roll over in a nanosecond if a government entity, state or federal, comes knocking. So everyone should know no corporate trustee will go to jail for any client. Now they won't tell you that, but I'm telling you, that's just the way it is. The problem with going offshore is there was a court case in Florida where the judge said, but you were the grantor who decided to put the money offshore, so I'm going to hold you in contempt of court, in jail, in county jail, until you decide to find the light to free up these assets somehow. And in essence, that's what happened. So going offshore, there's nothing wrong with that. There's just more moving parts. The Treasury Department has more reporting. It's more cumbersome. So it's just a pros and cons, cost versus time. And the most important question is, where are the assets custodied? And as long as they're physically custodied in the US and there's no one can abscond with it when it's offshore, that would probably be the more important questions.
In your presentation that I saw, one of the pages spoke about what themes do you see in trust documents where future generations can bloom?
So really, that's going to be in the distributions. And so you'll see a lot of documents saying distributions for health, education, maintenance, and support. Okay, well, Paris Hilton has a very different opinion about what is maintenance and what is support. Think of support as a need. Think of maintenance as a need and support as a want. So if you just put simple language like in the order or in the lifestyle that they are currently accustomed to, very simple language that makes the distribution rules much easier. What we've seen, the best documents that we see work is where they let people fail. If an individual will know that no matter what decisions they make, they will always be bailed out, there's no incentive for them to make great decisions. Everyone who's a member of the Family Office Association came to that position because they had to make great decisions because there was no backstop. So they have to figure out philosophically within their family, with their wealth, how do they allow in a trust document to let people fail in a way that they can learn. And I don't know what the answer is. It's none of my business. It's not our job. But that's where corporate trustees have done a bad job in trying to put themselves in the middle of making that decision. You do not want a corporate trustee making a decision about whether someone should fail or not in life. That means that the trust document was badly written. And that's an example of what they've done a bad job, misaligning family values over centuries.
In terms of the advent of technology, of things being digital, and to some degree what we're going through with COVID-19 now, stressing the system, people being more remote, and we're seeing the advent of more technology and digital, I'd assume that, like you said, this industry is a little staid. It's a little behind the times, some of it running on platforms and systems that might be decades old. What makes your organization different, and how are they more modern digitally in today's times?
So I would set aside us for a second, but this is more of a general comment. We look at the world as anything that is manually done, that takes no creative thought, is just repetition. That should be, you should use software and logic and machine learning to do that automatically, because there's no value add in getting a human to do that. So think of onboarding, think of gathering documents for trust tax returns. Think of doing annual administration reviews. All that can be done automatically. Think of distribution requests. All can be done automatically. Actually, we already do that automatically. Where trust companies should really focus their attention on is when there's problem solving going on. So that's where humans do a much better job than artificial intelligence right now, because we can think of patterns and common sense, and AI can't do that right now. So the way to look at it is use organizations that separate what's manual versus what's problem solving that takes creative thought. And a firm that sees manual with software and machine learning logic, that may be an option. It's not always the right answer, but it should be on the table of, is that important to us? And how is that reflected in their cost structure, in their trustee fee structures?
We've covered a lot the estate planning opportunities, mainly brought on by the economic challenges and COVID-19. So we don't want to pound it, but we do have new listeners listening in live and new people that will hear a podcast or video. If we could go over a little bit as to why right now is a tremendous opportunity to look at your trust and estate planning, given the current market dislocation, as well as the incredibly low interest rates being the main two drivers.
So those are really great points, Angelo. The first thing is, if you have a building that was worth 50 million at the end of December and today is worth 30, and you haven't used up your lifetime gift exclusion amounts, and it's within LP structures, that's a great opportunity to use estate planning to shift wealth to future generations. Second thing is, if you have companies or assets that are in a state with a high income tax bracket, you want to maybe move those to a Delaware, Nevada, or South Dakota trust, if they're already in a trust, to avoid paying the state income tax in that high jurisdiction, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, wherever it may be. And the third thing is also, as to your point, Angelo, is look at the assumptions of distributions, the assumptions of why the trust exists. What is it trying to do for this and future generations? So it's your money, your life, and your family timeline, all wrapped around the estate plan. Just simple questions.
Changing directions a little bit, what is a directed corporate trustee and how do they work?
So a directed trust is where the trustee and the financial advisor and potentially a distribution trustee is named in the document. It means that it's laid out and everyone's taking orders from the grantor in the trust document. A delegated trust, which is 95% of trusts, is where the trustee is making decisions of who to delegate authority to. A custodian, a financial advisor, a lawyer, a financial advisor, a family office, valuation experts. So delegation is a discretionary distribution on the trustee. Directed is where the trust document directs the trustee who to use and why.
If you had to pick advantages or disadvantages of a directed trust, what would be some of the key points?
Better, faster, cheaper.
Those are pretty important.
That's how I would describe it.
And for the audience listening in live, which is always exciting to do these recordings under, again, you could send in a chat question, which I'm happy to ask our special guest as we begin to take it a little bit towards the home stretch. So feel free to send in a question via the chat feature in Zoom. Christopher, in terms of some key points, some takeaways for the audience, and again, I really enjoyed your presentation, and those of you that are interested, you'll give your contact information towards the end where you could share a PowerPoint and PDF that, again, it's very visual, and something like issues pertaining to trust and trustees, having a visual follow along is very impactful. It's just a little more complex for us to do these video recordings under that feature, and those listening in from an audio perspective, that's not going to have any impact. But if there's some key points you would like to conclude and make, we would love to listen relative to trustee issues.
So when you think about trustee fees, let me give you 2 facts and 4 tips how to negotiate lower trustee fees. Number one, remember, traditional trust companies have a scaled AUM model, which is really antiquated because what you're really paying for any trustee is their risk and time. So what you want to do is strip out all the services that you don't want. Think of when you go to a restaurant and you can order a la carte. So let's just say you want the administration, you don't want any investment, you don't want any concierge services, you don't want any family governance. Think about what you can strip out and then negotiate that. Also think about where you can strip out risk to a trustee. So Angela, as you said, directed trusts are going to be cheaper than delegated trusts because there's less risk to the trustee. Time. Think about distributions, think about other administrative issues inside the trust document, because there's the fewer pieces or less time involved, the cheaper it will be to run the trust. And you can negotiate all this, but you got to peel it apart so when you're negotiating, so the corporate trustee can't get a little bit slippery and saying, oh no, we don't do it that way. Also remember, estate attorneys are not trained to think about the moving parts in trust administration. They're thinking about tax planning, estate planning, all really, really wonderful things. But they're not trained to think about trust administration. Think of a NASA scientist figuring out how a space guy is going to eat. I mean, you need to have a space guy in that team to figure out what's the best way. Also remember, corporate trustees, you don't want to pay a corporate trustee to do the tax return because they're not doing the tax planning. And by the way, it's my team from Ernst & Young. We left and we came together. So there's 5 of us that came from Ernst & Young. So corporate trustees do not do tax planning. They only do the trust tax return. And it's a waste of money to have them do it because they don't really do a good job anyway. So the other thing I would also say is corporate trustees are not a be-all and end-all solution. They are a solution. And you want to use corporate trustees who have 3 basic tenets within their employees. They're creative. They're oh my God, I just forgot. They're creative, they're adaptive, and they are, I forgot the third one. I'm so sorry. Creative,
you'll have to see the PowerPoint presentation, everyone, to get all 3. Well, actually, a little bit related to that. So imagine you were an advisor to families and you had to give them some tips in terms of interviewing corporate trustees. What are a couple of key questions and takeaways as they're making the rounds interviewing corporate trustees that are a little off the beaten path that maybe they should be asking?
Number one, you want to ask, what you're trying to understand, Angelo, is why do they exist? Why do they want to do this work? Not the trust officer, but the actual trust company. So you want to figure out, why do they exist? Why do they do what they do? And really is you're trying to figure out the DNA of that corporate trustee. Because let me just tell you, every corporate trustee, whether it's us or the traditional ones or our competitors, we actually all do the exact same thing. How we do it is very different. Like Angela, you and I could buy Julia Child's cookbook and we will never cook as well as she.
Yet speak for yourself, Christopher.
So we still, so it's more than just the ingredients and the recipe. It's the reason of why you're doing it in the first place. And that's the best way to interview, is those 2 basic questions.
No, that's very, very thoughtful. We had a question come in from someone from our audience. Is it difficult to move from a delegated trust to a directed trust? Do you have to decant to do that?
You don't have to decant. You can modify or you can amend a trust document. If you will need to get all of the beneficiaries, the primary beneficiaries, to sign off. If there are minors who are future beneficiaries, you need to potentially get an attorney ad litem done as well. South Dakota, Nevada, Delaware have the best rules to get that done lickety split and really fast. So it's super simple, as long as you get everyone signing off.
Excellent. And although it's going down a little bit of a different path, and we're going to do a upcoming video podcast on this in a couple of weeks, obviously for families of great wealth that would have a single family office, most all of them are going to be familiar with, should I set up a private trust company? We don't need to do an hour or two on a private trust company. Again, that's coming up in a couple of more weeks. But if you had to give a 1 or 2 minute overview for an audience listening in, what would you say?
It's really simple. If you want to have control over who gets the money and how is the money invested, you can either use a directed trust or you can use a private trust company. Private trust companies are great for the ego. You got to make sure that the family office in whatever state it's in is not involved in the trust administration, and there's 7 factors in doing trust administration in their own individual state. Wyoming actually is the best state for private trusts. So, and you should generally look at about 250 or 500 million before you set up your own private trust company. They're a great answer if they're done absolutely right. But if you want to delegate and just make it quick and fast, then give the corporate trustee no power to invest money or do distributions. And you, in essence, without having the cool factor, have the same answer.
Very, very thoughtful and very helpful. We're going to take it a little bit to the home stretch, and I will open the floor to some more questions, perhaps even in taking the risk of taking everyone off mute, and hopefully it's not going to be too noisy. But right before I do that, what would be some closing comments, some recommendations you would have for those listening in relative to trustee issues?
I'm 3rd generation, and I work like I don't have money. And the best advice I can say is, when using trusts, make sure that the offspring have a chance to make mistakes and fall flat on their face.
Well, that's very honest.
So whatever everyone creates with their estate planning documents, that may be the greatest gift. And my brother is, is very different than me, and that's fine. So not everyone can be, someone who's always driven and working it and, going after it. It's okay. And that's the most difficult thing in all estate planning, especially at this level of wealth. So that's all I would say.
I did look to unmute some of those that may be muted, but you want to be very private and discreetful, don't you? You put yourself back on mute. If you did want to ask a question directly to Christopher, as opposed to using the chat feature, you could take yourself off mute and fire away. If it's not clear, I'll try to relay that to Christopher. So now would be the time if anyone specifically has a question. Anyone?
Hey, Angela. Nelson.
Oh, hi, Nelson.
Hey, quick question. And, I have one son, as you know him, Angela, wonderful kid, and he's doing very well. I have no idea how my grandkids are going to turn out. So I've always told my son, the second he isn't working hard, dedicating his life to helping others and treating his health well, we would cut him off. No drugs, no partying, doing silly things around the world. And my trust, when I look at it, has no direction to the future about how to deal with those grandkids. How does the trustee look at the kid and say, well, he's a drug addict or he's an alcoholic, I'm going to keep supporting him? I'm pretty hard line. If they're making a mistake, I want them to fall on their face. And I'm kind of with you. So it's an irrevocable trust. Is there anything I can do now to change what's there? Or does a trustee look at it and just say the intent is not to support bad behavior?
So because it doesn't specifically say about the grandkids, you would have to modify the trust. And in states like Delaware, South Dakota, or Nevada, that is an easy adjustment. It is a possible adjustment because you're not changing the actual distribution provisions. You're just adding a more definition around what you did for your son you also want your grandchildren to follow the same sort of structures.
Well,
So,
we're California, unchangeable. It's about 23-year-old trust.
yeah, the age of it is immaterial. It's really a function of moving it to a state that allows this to happen.
My trust can't be moved.
Does it specifically say that?
It says it'll be under the laws of the state of California. It doesn't say not moved, but it says it will be under the laws. So is that kind of...
As long as it doesn't say it can't be moved, no brainer. It can be moved.
Perfect. Okay. Well, you'll be getting my documents soon then.
There was a follow-up question to what Nelson said, which was a comment and a question, Christopher. That would be, couldn't he, meaning Nelson's question, couldn't he make a letter of wishes for the trustee to help guide for future decisions?
Yes, and make sure that you make it, and this is not necessary, but what it does is it removes risk of how important this was from the grantor. So if it's notarized, and you make it plain language, like I am not friggin' kidding, and you are emphatic in those letters of wishes, don't beat around the bush. Just cut it right to the choice. Think John Steinbeck, do not think Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens wrote forever. John Steinbeck said very little in very few words. So great idea. Do it notarized, not necessary, but it gives more credence that the trustee can rely on it and have less risk. And it costs, and it gives them more flexibility. Great question.
Any other questions, anyone? I would assume not. And by the way, the questions today by both Nelson on audio and others by chat were tremendous. I should have said they were coming from me. It would make me look smarter. And you did a great job too, Christopher. For those that would like to learn more, perhaps this presentation that I mentioned that we didn't show during the visual part today, how could they learn more about the firm and how could they connect with you?
I think the best thing is just focus on learning. If you could send them the PDF that I sent you, and if there's any questions they have on that, they can go to the last page, and there it has our our website and email address. But they can also go to Google and type in picking a trustee or trustee fees. And I wrote some 5,000 and 6,000 word essays on how to think about those things. So that's the way that I would look at it.
Yes, what I'll do for those that are listening in, I will simply send over the PDF probably in about the next hour, meaning listening in live. For those that may hear this post the event, it may be better directly reaching out to Christopher, but if you reach out to me, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Feel free to say hello. So I'm going to give a little bit of some of that for you, Christopher. It's Christopher Holtby, H-O-L-T as in Tom, B as in boy, Y. That's Christopher Holtby, co-founder and chief marketing officer for Wealth Advisors Trust Company. What would be a website, or if you wanted to give an email where people could reach you directly, Christopher?
It would be my last name at wealthadvisorstrust.com. And the website is the same as the ending of the email address.
Excellent. So hopefully you all got that, but worst case, you could always reach out to me. I will do a little bit of a close now because, again, we have a significant number of people around the world that will hear this. And although you on the call know who I am, many of them don't. So I'll take a minute just to give a little bit of context. One, thank you all for listening in. I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office podcast on YouTube. And we also produce it on Apple and on Stitcher in most circumstances. So hopefully you've been enjoying the podcast. It's free to subscribe. I hope you're doing so. I'm also the founder and CEO of Family Office Association. We're a global membership organization dedicated to the interest of successful families and their single family offices. We do a tremendous amount of original proprietary content. Now more than ever, I'm home 24/7, and we host a significant number of global programming, meaning events. Now, that's a little bit on hold, but what we've done in lieu of that, and I've never been so busy, is I'm basically doing these online meetings every business day, or practically every business day. And some of them are converted to a video or audio or a podcast for more broader audiences to be familiar with us, but a lot of it is not. And some of what we do is strictly peer-to-peer. We call it a mastermind online series of family office to family office. So we've been incredibly active and busy, busier than ever. And I miss physical events, and one day they'll come back, but these online meetings are very efficient. We've had amazing guests, sometimes that I wouldn't normally be able to get, but they're home 24/7. And we got some really special people coming up, one being David Sinclair, who's one of the greatest health experts that I know of. We'll do a little bit of COVID-19, but mainly it's going to be about longevity issues. He's a frequent guest on Joe Rogan. So he's a very, very prominent person. His organization he's inside of Harvard. He's a very smart guy. You'll hear more about that upcoming. So lots going on. I'm relatively easy to reach, especially now. FamilyOfficeAssociation.com, but even AngeloRobles.com. And an email would be angelo@FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. I'm very active on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. The YouTube channel, by the way, which we're expanding effectively daily, it's a great name. I registered it years ago. It simply is Family Office. So if you go to YouTube and pull up Family Office channel, that should be able to locate my channel. On that note, everyone, I took up enough time. We hope you enjoyed. Those listening in live, those that will hear this post the event, we hope you enjoyed as well. I would like to thank again our special guest, Christopher N. Holtby, co-founder, chief marketing officer of Wealth Advisors Trust Company. Thank you so much, Christopher.
Thank you so much, Angelo. Cheers, everyone.